Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dianna Booher. Welcome. Those of you who have seen the show before know that it's an interview show that we pose questions to thinkers and doers like Dianna, who are making our world better because they lead with grace. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff. You know, the caring, the connecting, the commitment we feel toward others. And grace for me is generosity, respect, compassion. And when you do it as a leader, especially in challenging times, it means you act for the benefit of all and you energize the organization. It's such a pleasure to welcome you today, Dianna. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
I want to tell people all about you. And I love you have this wonderful interview. You may not have met Dianna Booher yet, but you know her books, and it's 48 at least and counting. So anyway, I think I've written a lot, but compared to you, Dianna, I'm not even getting started.
You've got to do a lot missing those planes sitting in the airport, right?
Well, it's 48 books. I love this. 60 foreign language editions, and nothing makes me prouder than a foreign edition. So that's really cool. Your most recent titles are Faster, Fewer, Better Emails, which we will talk about, Communicate Like a Leader, What More Can I Say, and Personal Presence. You are a national media, I'll say celebrity, because you've been on Good Morning America, featured in USA Today, Wall Street Journal, NPR, Forbes, and your clients are almost 1/3, or probably more than 1/3 of the Fortune 500, and that doesn't even include everybody else you've consulted for, including the United States Navy, the United States Army, and NASA. And I love this thing. You even did some communication work with the United States Senate, and you say you had no positive difference.
From what you see on TV now, no, and what you see on the floor of Congress, no difference.
Okay. So, Dianna, I ask all these guests, our world's upside down. What are you hearing from your clients and people you talk to?
I think I hear most often is just the feeling of being overwhelmed, because of information, not so much the workload, obviously that's there and it was there before this pandemic, but just webinar information, everybody emailing you, being on Zoom all day long. They feel overwhelmed, and it's, how do I focus? What do I take advantage of? Because a lot of it is free information. And then how do I stand out? I think that people are always asking, how do I stand out among a field of leaders? We're training more and more leaders. So everybody's on an equal, everybody's taking a step up. They're all on an equal plane.
So on that topic, which is really good, just to lead off, what advice do you give someone who said, hey, Dianna, I want to stand out? So what do you say to them?
Well, first of all, I think they need to focus. I think many people, because of the information, information is not communication. That's one point
Absolutely.
I try to get across. It is not the same. And so when they leave their email open all day and it's just flooding them, that ding, 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 breaking their focus on what their really important work is. So I tell them, decide what's important and set aside that time to do it. And then, check your email 2 or 3 times a day. But the other thing I think that leaders need to do, particularly executives and people with new innovative ideas, they need to write a book, because that spreads its distribution. You personally can only consult with a certain number of people, or even if you're doing a keynote for 5,000 people, there's only so many people in that room. And that, I think, is the key way, publishing with the major publishers so that you have distribution around the world. That makes you stand out.
Great. And we're going to talk about, because you help writers write their book called the Dianna Booher Book Camp. So I want to get to that in a moment. So let's talk communication, in which you have excelled. So often when we talk about communication, we focus on the problems, which are lack of, or what? So
well, yes, lack of communication, really in touch, real connections with people. Like I said, we send out the information, but it's not always building that relationship. And we also miss the vital importance, I think, of listening.
Why do you think it's so hard to listen?
I think that we have, again, it's a focus problem. We have so many things going on, and we have a to-do list, and we have these projects going on, and it's quicker, not more effective, but quicker to just keep shooting out. I need you to know this. I need you to know this. And here's another fact. Here's another detail that's important to you. And we don't think about the impact of that and letting it really, people have time to digest and ask questions about it and make sure they draw the right conclusion. And John, I'm sure you've had the experience of being in a meeting and somebody says something and everybody just kind of nods. You walk out in the hall and somebody looks at you and says, do you know what we're doing here?
Yeah.
What was his point?
Yeah.
And that's what happens when it's all one way, and it's just got to be two way. You've got to test. You've got to ask the appropriate questions to test people that they're really drawing the same conclusion that you intended to convey.
Right. Well, no, the tradition that the military has is called the brief back. Do you teach that? So, yeah. I
do, but I don't call it that, obviously. But yes, before I sold my training company a couple of years ago, we had a 2-day listening course, and many executives would walk in and think, this is just going to be something to see what my people say, not for me. But at the end of that program, a lot of the comments are, I didn't realize I was such a poor listener.
Yeah, I know. and that's it. So I love that takeaway, because we all I think people in a management position want to say they're good listeners, but they really aren't. And I know when we do our 360 evaluations, that's one of the issues that comes up is poor listening. So
right. I was in a corporation several years back, and this guy was the executive vice president. He had 18 different divisions around the globe reporting to them. He had brought them all in one day, and he said, would you come out and observe what's going on my 360? I got many comments about not listening. I would sit there and I watched that meeting all day long. At the end, and I say, I totally agree. You were not listening. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, first of all, the body language. He was sitting there like this, hands, his chin on his hand and leaning back, all the body language, wandering eyes that would say, I really don't care. Just spit it out, John, and go on to Mary. Spit it out, Mary. Go on to Sarah. It was just.
That's body language is so critical, but it's also the focus of what you talk about. I remember bringing in with an executive I was working with, and I brought in a consultant, and the first thing this executive did was sat down. I don't know that he made eye contact, and he opened up it was a BlackBerry and just started doing that. And so it's like, tell me what you're going to sell me. And then, it's
his head's down like this and saying, come on, just finish it, right?
Yeah, right. That's it. And so, and I honestly think most people are not malintended in that way. I just think that they are so busy, they don't really realize the effect. Would you agree or not? So
I agree. And they don't think about impact. They're thinking about, what do I need to get across to you? They don't think about, what do I need to take from you? What information can you give me that's going to make a difference in what I'm doing today?
That is so critical. It's what I want to tell you, and because I'm the boss, and I've got so much, as you were saying, I have so much on my plate, I just have to get it out. So anyway, and what about so much of communication, and even now I may be more noticeable on video, so we're all working visually, are facial expressions. I think you were talking about that moments ago.
Yes, extremely important. In fact, there's so much that we communicate just through our speaking and our physical presence. In that book that you mentioned earlier, Creating Personal Presence, I divided it into 4 categories. It's how you look, how you talk, how you think, and how you act. And about acting, I'm talking about, character traits, confidence, your area. But the first thing that people notice is how you look. Mm-hmm. And if your eyes are darting around, they're looking down, it's expresses dishonesty in most cultures. Now, there are some differences in culture. And then the word choices, how you talk, the word choices, do they match your body language? When there's a disconnect between the two, then people are always going to pay attention to your body language, not what's coming out of your mouth.
Can you give me an example of a disconnect between words and body language then?
Well, For example, an employee comes in and says, I'm taking care of my parents, as you know, and I really need some time off. My mom's got to go for therapy and I've got to drive her. And the boss says, that's fine. Okay. But the tone does not match the words. I mean, the tone is, how can you be gone during this time? No, I don't approve of that. But what choice do I have? I mean, that's what the boss is communicating.
Yeah, and it's a kind of, I think what you were saying, it's a dismissive attitude, or it's you're not important to me.
Right. What you're saying is inconsequential. I don't have time to hear that. Right. That is the message that many leaders do communicate.
Right. One of the things that we always talk about listening. We always talk about an active listening, which engaging, as you and I are doing. But one thing that, and this is where you specialize, we overlook written communication, do we not? So.
We do. And there's so many people that they think email is their job, and it is not.
Well, unfortunately for some people it is.
They keep that email open, and it distracts all the time. But they have so many other little habits that would improve their productivity if they change those habits. For example, not acknowledging. I mean, you would never, if somebody walked up to you and said something, you would never just give them the blank stare. I mean,
I would, but no. I know.
Even if it's a head nod, most people would acknowledge, but they don't acknowledge email. And what the consequence of that is that people keep reminding them. They'll send them another, just reminding you that such and such is due on Friday. Just one more reminder. And if you would just acknowledge, I don't have the information, I will get back to you within a couple of weeks, then people would understand why you're not getting back to them or attending something. And just the fact that it's disarranged, it's disorganized. Many people talk about what they're interested in at the beginning rather than what's the message to the intended reader. And when you have multiple readers in email, that becomes even more complex. So you need to give the key message and the key action you want right up front before you go through the details.
That is so important. And I think the lesson of that is think before you write.
Absolutely. But a lot of people think as they write rather than before they write. And they start off by saying, as you know, we were in the meeting a couple of weeks ago and Bob told me such and such, and then Madison said so-and-so, and they go through all the details, and the reader's going, where are you going? Where are you going with this? Get to the point, get to the point. And you need to start without the background that most people think is necessary. And I hear that all the time from engineers, from attorneys. We've got to give them a little background. But I say, no, you don't. Start with the point and what action you want or what action you're going to take. And then you circle back and provide any detail they might need.
Right. One of my favorite stories is goes back to, and it's relevant to our times, is Harry Truman, who, like many people, wrestled with a temper. And so he would write letters and then put them in a drawer. Somehow with emails, it's the flaming email. So what advice do you have if you're angry?
Well, I say write that email and then delete it or let it sit overnight. I call it the cool off period. And then you will come back and you will change it, because it's very hard to determine the tone, your own tone of something. When you read it cold the next day, then you pick up some of those, what I call fight words, that need to be changed. And even the structure of the sentence makes a good deal of difference. In fact, John, this has probably been 2 decades ago, but it was I just see it over and over, people revealing their attitude about others through their email, and they don't realize it. I had a CEO that asked me to come in. He says, I've got 4 executive vice presidents. I want to send you everything they write, up to me and the board of directors, to each other, and down to their staff. Would you go through it and then come in and tell me about their management style? And I said, whoa, I'm not sure I can do that. I've never done any research on that. And he said, oh, just try it. I take your disclaimer here, but just try it. And it was amazing, the difference here in how they wrote when they wrote up the chain to him, as opposed to down to their staff. And I went in and he says, now go meet with those people and tell them what you saw. Yeah. And they were embarrassed. Many of them thought, oh, how does that come across in that email or that report? And when I pointed out specific things, they went, oh, well, that's right. Yeah. So people just don't realize that.
Right. So you used a term, fighting words. What's an example of a fighting word in an email? So,
Well, it can be just as innocuous as must. You must do so and so, or you have to do so and so, because people's reaction is, I don't have to do anything, or you don't make me do anything. But words like, we consider this unreasonable demand. Well, you're talking to a client and they're saying, well, I'll tell you what's reasonable, not you tell me. Or saying things like unfair, or even complaint. When people say, I really appreciate what you're doing, but I do have one complaint. It would be far better in most situations to say, I appreciate what you're doing. I do have a concern about, just substituting the word concern as opposed to complaint. Yeah. Asking a question when you're give someone a directive as a leader, asking them a question, would you please do so-and-so, is much softer. Although it's still clear, very clear, it's much softer than just say, do this.
Yeah. That's right. So, and I'm glad how you clarify that. And so, once upon a time, written communications were not as, they're always important. Of course they are. But with email, that is a primary source of communication, and why you wrote a book about it, which is, the title is.
Yeah, it's a faster, fewer, better emails. And a great story with that, particularly, comes to mind every time somebody asks me about the importance of it. I was working with an oil company, and key executives kept saying, I can't get my budget from, it was when Armand Hammer at Occidental Petroleum was leading it. And he kept saying, I can't get my budget for my division improved. And so once I showed him how to revise the whole, budget request, he talked to him. He got immediate approval. He said, I sent it out like at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 8 o'clock, I had my answer and I had my budget. And he said, I called him up and I said, I wrote you the same thing, except it was, organized in a different way 3 months ago. Why did I just now get an answer and so promptly? And he said, I never saw the first one. I never read the first one. It was too long. So
that's a good lesson. Yeah, that's a good lesson.
The length and the structure affects how people receive, or whether they can read it or not.
No, I've worked with people who are extraordinarily good email communicators, and it's just, as you said, set your premise, kind of sets it up as a decision memo or a quick brief, and you know exactly where they stand. That takes practice to it. You have to practice it. So what's a quick lesson for somebody who wants to get better at email? Is it think first or what?
Think first, get your message up front and your action up front. Also respond. And when you're asking people about details or questions, be very specific. Yeah. I don't know. I can't tell you, John, how many emails I get from people, particular publishers, and they'll say something like, blah, blah, blah. Your thoughts? No. I think I've got a lot of thoughts on that. What do you want to know? You'll get a much better response if you actually ask specific questions. I mean, with a bulleted list or numbered list, so that people can respond according to what's relevant in this situation that you are thinking about. Right. So just being specific, and particularly being specific about deadlines. People many times say, send me something as soon as possible. Well, you know, your soon as possible may not be my as soon as possible, or at your earliest convenience. I mean, do they mean drop everything and do it right now in these 30 minutes? Mm-hmm. Or do they mean by tomorrow? And so just little things like that make a tremendous difference.
Great. You talk, we've covered the issue of communication, and we've talked physicality, and we've talked facial expressions and oral communication. Now we're in the virtual world. What key insights do you teach people when they say, how do I come across better on video, Dianna?
Well, first of all, you need to pay attention to your facial expression and the fact that your eye contact, that you're looking in the camera, so that you look like you're talking to it rather than talking to a photograph over here or somebody a little square. You also need to speak up. I think because people are seated when they're used to standing up to do a presentation. Oh, right. Yeah. They tend to mumble. And then I think it's important to pay attention to the impression you're creating with the background. Right. You're going to find this hard to believe, but I once did an interview where the guy asked me to log. It's a college professor, and this was really a big audience. He asked me to log on a little early. When I did, he wasn't dressed. he had his shirt hanging open, and in that 10 minutes, he got up and walked to the back, changed pants, and buttoned up a shirt.
In front of the camera.
That's hard to believe.
Yeah.
I have seen people do that kind of distracting thing while they're on camera. So if you've got to do something, somebody walks into your room, you've got to talk, at least turn off your camera for a moment to do something like that. And then pay attention. If you've got a desk that's just piled with junk and disorganization, people walk away thinking, wow, that person's overwhelmed. Wow, they can't keep up with their work.
What an interesting insight. I've talked about, I like the cluttered background, but that's also kind of an indication of a cluttered mind, really?
Yes.
Or as you were being kind, overwhelmed.
Yes, it is. It shows that you don't have a plan for the day. You don't know exactly when you're going to be doing what. Right. And it does make you look like, like we talk about kids in school, a slow learner. You're a slow worker. You're just not up with things.
Now I want to pull back the lens just a little bit, because this is something I know you know a lot about. And it ties into communication, and it's ambition. We praise it in men, but women, it's like, it's not always perceived as a positive. What reflective thought do you have on that, Dianna?
Well, I think that, again, that's a perception that's changing.
Yes.
But I think that women often dislike conflict. Now, men seem to, and the research for about 2 decades on this, is that men are much more inclined to embrace conflict. And when women walk away from it or seem to be too agreeable, people take that as indecisiveness. Yeah. I've had executives ask me before, would you come in and just follow so-and-so around? I want you to give me an idea of how they come across to their staff. Are they really making good decisions? And in those interviews, what I've discovered is that if a woman typically, the body language we talked about earlier, she's typically nodding her head. That might mean to her, I'm listening to you. I'm acknowledging what you're saying. Right. But many times a man will think that means that you're just agreeing. You have no thoughts of your own. You can't make a decision. And that was the case for this big Fortune 10 company. And they were about to dismiss a woman because she said she doesn't speak up. And she nods her head and goes along with whatever's happening. So I think 3 things that women can do to communicate that they are confident and confidence is pay attention to their body language that we've already talked about, a body language of confidence, to embrace conflict, and to be sure to speak up when you disagree. Sometimes they'll walk out of a meeting thinking I've disagreed, but they'll write the email saying I disagree with what we've just decided there, rather than speak it. And I think being able to speak it is much more important.
Right. It's so one thing you mentioned, and I think women are far better at it, and it shows up on video. And I often encourage people just to watch this kind of stuff. Is I think women are much more attentive in listening than men. Yes. So that's how can women turn that into a virtue?
Well, women can be standing at maybe in the lobby, and there's a big holiday party going on, or any kind of cocktail party before a client meeting. And she's nodding her head, listening to this guy, and she's thinking, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I can't wait till I escape, Right. But women are very good at listening. They can repeat an entire conversation. Now, of course, I do that as a writer because I'm paying attention to detail, but just in general, women are very attentive with their body language. They can read between the lines. They read body language. So again, the research bears that out. And I think they need to take advantage of that by using those other things that they pick up in a conversation just by that attentive listening.
And I think women are much more consensual in the sense of acknowledging where ideas came from, whereas men may be less so. Is that?
I agree with that. I certainly do. Yes. And women many times share the credit. Yes. And that's good, but sometimes it's perceived as, oh, well, you didn't really do this. Maybe they did the bulk of a project, but they'll say, well, thank you for that acknowledgement, but Harry and John and Susan were also on the team. So they're passing that credit around. So in some way, to some listeners, that diminishes what she contributed. And it shouldn't at all.
Right. And that's a good point. I want to get to, because you talked about standing out and presence and communication, and all this comes together in a book. So, and you help people put together books. So tell me about the Booher Book Camp. So.
Well, in that book camp, what I'm hoping to do is to get leaders, consultants, executives, entrepreneurs, anybody who needs to get their message out to a broader audience, to learn how to put together a proposal, how to write a query letter, how to find an agent, and land a big contract with a major publisher. So they do have worldwide distribution. That, in fact, I think that is the biggest thing that a thought leader can do, is to make sure their message, and many people have a great message, it just doesn't get heard because either they've self-published the book and they have limited distribution, or they don't write a book at all. Yeah. And so the idea of Booher Book Camp is to get people to walk out after 3 days and have that proposal ready to land a big contract.
And you've had great successes. And I know that the people that you have helped, one of them in particular, got a major book contract, and that's just one among many. So, but I think there's a deeper purpose in as giving. Is it not also getting people to believe in their message and how they share it? So.
Yes, you can have a small message and affect a lot of people's lives. You have to have that message out there. And many people do have very meaningful messages that would change an organization, that would change a family, that would change a community. But nobody hears it. It's dying inside. Right. And a lot of people think it's just too overwhelming, particularly at the executive level. They will say, well, I don't have time for that. I have a lot of other projects. Mm-hmm. In fact, somebody that's in my upcoming workshop said the same thing. If I called his name, it would be a household name. But he said, I've published everywhere, published with Harvard Business Review, many thousands of articles, but I've never done a book. I just don't have time. And what I do is to say, it doesn't need to take that time. If you've got a system, which I communicate to them, give them that system, they can do a book in 2 to 3 weeks, not months, not years, but 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And now I'm not talking about the research. You may have been doing the research in your work for your entire life. Right. As a consultant, you're gathering examples, and you can remember things that happened 3 decades ago that would be a great illustration. But for actually drafting that book, I actually keep a log, and I recommend that people keep a log of their time. How many pages did you write, or how many words today? And then they see that it is not this terrible, big, overwhelming project, but it is very valuable to their work and their credentials. I think that's, we have the cliche in our culture. When somebody, you think, well, are they really an authority on that subject? And they say, well, sure, he wrote the book, or yeah, she wrote the book. Yep. And that's sort of the ultimate credibility, to have a book with a major publisher.
It is. Now we're coming close to the end of our show, and I always ask people, and it's tied into communication, how we connect, because that was the first word you said when in communication, you said connection. Mm-hmm. And I like to say that one of the connectors that facilitates it is grace. So you have a story of grace that you want to share, Dianna? Okay.
John, when I first read your book, Grace, I thought you talked about generosity, and the first person that came to mind is somebody I knew a long time ago. She had 4 kids under the age of 6, and her husband had become an alcoholic, and he was in jail for reckless driving, assault and battery, hot checks. She was destitute. She had not worked because of the kids. When she got her first paycheck, this was right before Christmas, I was walking up. She was a neighbor. I walked up to her door, knocked on the back door, opened it, and the little one came running to me. And I said, Stevie, what are you doing? And he said, we're going shopping for all the kids on the Indian reservation. And I thought, she's destitute. She's about to be evicted from her house. Okay. But she was already teaching her kids about generosity. And as I knew her, she took in a teenager that wasn't getting along. She took in an unwed mother and let her stay there until the baby was born. She took in an older guy who was an alcoholic after he had gone through a therapy
program. Yeah.
Recovery program. So she was so generous, not just with her money, but the few quarters she was giving those kids to go pick out something for the other kids who didn't have anything, but with her time and the way she served the community, she was always leading some project. And she's the epitome of generosity and thinking of others before self.
And that's so powerful. What a great story. And then this is a woman who needs grace, but how does she express it? She gives to others and sets such an example that's resonated with you for all these years. So
it has. I remember every detail, and I can see that scene when those kids have those stack of quarters. I'm thinking, Lynn, this is your first paycheck. And they're going out shopping for somebody else.
Well, that's a great story. So how can people find you, Dianna?
Well, my main website, Booher Research, just like my name, Booher, BooherResearch.com, or the Booher Book Camp. There's a site for that as well, Booher Book Camp.
Great. Well, good. It has been a pleasure and we will put that in the notes for the video. Dianna, you are an inspiration to me, and it's an honor to have you on the show today. So I say thank you.
Thank you, John. Enjoyed it.
Great.